She is a serial entrepreneur, co-founder of ClearBank, the world's largest digital investor.
She also happens to be the youngest entrepreneur ever to star as a dragon on Dragon's Den.
I'm Michele Romanow. I'm a serial entrepreneur, which means I'm good at building businesses and bad at many other things.
You're a very wise old soul, but you are young. Why are you so successful so young?
Well, it's not the years, it's the miles. Wisdom doesn't come from reading it in a book. Wisdom comes from like the genuine life experience you were having, things really not working out, and you taking the time to reflect and build yourself into a better person.
Michele, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Such an honor to have you here. Perhaps we could start off by telling the audience a little bit about yourself. If anyone that doesn't know you can get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, of course. I'm Michele Romanow. I'm a serial entrepreneur, which means I'm good at building businesses and bad at many other things. I have done everything from build a caviar business from scratch that was a great business until we hit the 2008 recession. So that was kind of my first foray into entrepreneurship. Then built an e-commerce company that's now public in Canada, an app that I sold to Groupon. And when I was 28 years old, I got a really interesting phone call. And the folks on the other line said, "Look, we're looking for you to join the cast of Dragon's Den." And I was like, "You must have the wrong person." And they said, "No, we want you to audition." And I ended up getting a spot on the show. I was the youngest dragon in something like 30 countries where the show was made. And I think fundamentally I saw, I was a founder at heart. I wasn't an investor. And so I saw businesses much differently. And what I saw on the show is everyone was coming on, looking to give up 10% of their business for their first $100,000. And what was fascinating is when you ask those founders what they needed the money for, they always said the same two things. I need money for ad spend and I need money for inventory. And so in the back of my mind, I'm like, why are founders using the most expensive capital in the world to do something that has a fixed return? So the next day I returned back to the show. The next pitch I heard that sounded like this, I was like, look, I'm going to try a new deal type. I'm going to give you that $100,000 you were looking for. Instead of taking 10% of your business that I will own forever, I just want 10% of your revenue until you pay me back my capital plus 6%. And the founder's like, this sounds like a loan. And I was like, no, if it was a loan, they would have a personal guarantee. So I get to stake your house and your personal assets if you didn't pay me back. And it would have a lien against your business, meaning I would bankrupt you if you didn't pay me back. This is truly just a rev share designed for your business. And so the founder that day is like, okay, what's the hitch? And I said, look, I just need to have access to your digital data accounts. So the founder that day took the deal. Today, we have now invested more than $3.5 billion in 7,000 different companies in 6 different countries around the world, which is really cool. We've invented this brand new way of funding models, which is revenue-based funding, and have taken that in and ourselves become we were Softbank's first Canadian investment, have become a unicorn, and have continued to grow as a result of this.
So for those that are listening, you're the co-founder of ClearCo, for those that don't know. And I think only a founder could invent an incredible business like this, because it feels like you put yourself in the shoes of the founder, thought about your experience around how valuable equity is, and gave them a different way to get what they need. And so do you think being a founder is something that, when you think about being a founder, do you think yourself, okay, I don't want to get into debt, but at the same time, somehow equity doesn't seem that valuable when you first start a business to people. But you've been through the whole cycle. So I think the lesson I want people to take away straight away is that how valuable equity is. But how do you value equity now? So when you're in Dragon's Den and investing in people, I was just reading about your roster. How do you 250 pitches in 17 days is your roster, which is crazy. But how do you decide whether the valuation is realistic? Because you are still investing in businesses and taking equity. And how do you decide what the value actually is?
Yeah, so my work at ClearCo is different than my work on Dragon's Den, where I do my own series of equity investments. I think I look for very different things. I think ClearCo is a way better option. I mean, if I was just on Dragon's Den offering ClearCo deals all day, I think the founder would choose me every single time. It's a way better deal for the founder, and it's also so many founders are coming and discovering revenue-based funding for the first time because we've been on a massive decline of venture capital. There's so much less venture capital out there and being deployed this year than there was even a year ago. And for the equity investments, it's a little different. I I take the viewpoint that I'm going to work alongside a founder and do a lot of work in terms of investing in a business that way. And I'm really looking for a founder with an enormous amount of resilience and grit. That's probably the biggest thing, is that you are going to be punched in the face so many times as a founder. And I always describe it as like, okay, you just got your black eye and you're walking back into that ring and you're like, okay, we're going to do 350 days of this. And it's a lot of resilience. I mean, when we started ClearCo, 200 people on Wall Street told us that this was not possible. I think the meanest one said, "Ma'am, you don't understand credit." And I said, "No, I think that founders, it's what you said earlier. It's like it would take a founder to start this business. I think there's a huge advantage when you're not from an industry and starting a business. And, I look at one of the companies I invested in was a woman named Catherine that started a company called SheerTex that makes indestructible pantyhose. And I mean, there's been like thousands of people in the hosiery business who are like, no, pantyhose will always run. And she had to come in with a completely different viewpoint, which is that, no, I'm going to see if I can take Kevlar fiber and fiber from bulletproof vests. I'm going to see if I can weave it together. She broke 300 sewing machines trying to do this for the first time. And she created a product that was totally revolutionary to the category. And so I think my experience is the same. I understood that I was a self-funded e-commerce company for 6 years, and no one thought we were low enough risk to provide us with funding. But I knew that, like, if I had good unit economics, right? If I was selling things for $100 that cost me, $50 in product costs and I had $20 in ad sales, I was making money on every unit. And I could track those things. And those would be very valuable businesses to invest in. And so I think there was a lot of parts about fintech and finance I had no idea. I mean, I always make founders laugh. When you've been in finance for 5 minutes, you know what KYC means. It's the acronym that stands for Know Your Customer, which is the most basic piece of compliance you need to do to ship someone money. And I remember my first meeting starting this company, and I wrote down KYC, ? Google this. And so you don't have to be from an industry to disrupt it. You have to understand the customer base, and then you can truly build something better.
I love that. There's so many times I've also got into investing in startups from a founder perspective and felt like an imposter. Did exactly the same thing. Googled all the terminology everyone was using in the room and kept quiet, thinking I knew what they were saying. So that's
totally.
And I think the point you're making, I don't want people to miss this. I think this might really help people, and I don't want it to get overlooked by accident. Is that sometimes outside the industry, people coming in and say fixing a problem that the industry isn't presently fixing is a great way to do things. Like Elon Musk doesn't know anything about rockets, right? Let's face it, he does now. In fairness to him, but at first you hire people that know things about rockets, right? You see the problem clearer sometimes from being outside the house and not inside the house, sort of thing. So such a great point. You mentioned there. Well, first of all, I just wanted to clarify. Last thing I read, you guys were valued at over $2 billion. So you've literally proved 200 people in the finance sector wrong. So good for you. But you mentioned something that I don't think we talk about enough in business. You mentioned in 2008 you had a business that failed, and I think people listening might want to relate to like your journey a little bit. So let's talk about that, because a lot of people hear you built a unicorn and that would be amazing, and they maybe won't realize how many failures or how much setbacks you've had to get there. So talk a little bit about the 2008 experience.
Yeah, I mean, look, the journey of a founder is you're going to be failing 80% of the time. That's a real number. That's not a made up number. It's 80% of the things you try don't work, and that's whether I'm trying an experiment at ClearCo. That's whether I'm trying to build another company, and so you have to be able to mentally withstand an enormous amount of failure to be able to do this job, and you need to surround yourself with people who have lived that and know that to be able to do that. So my early failures were incredibly instrumental in building that level of resilience, right? In undergrad, we started playing this game, which was What's the Next $1 Million Idea? Me and my two business partners, Ryan and Anatoly, brainstormed hundreds of different ideas in terms of, what could be the next thing we work on. We finally settled on caviar and fish farming, which is the craziest thing 3 21-year-olds could have come up with. And we had really good reason. Worldwide supply of caviar was down by 95%. The world had overfished the Caspian Sea. And we thought there was a way to make this. And so we called, chefs, and they couldn't find the product. We we called producers and we said we were students and we asked for free tours of their facility. We, made a business plan and entered these business plan competitions in undergrad and won about $100,000 in prize money. So that gave us a little bit of money and time to go out and build this company from scratch. We actually set up this fishery. I mean, we were in the East Coast, like boats, fishermen, my hands knee deep in fish, the whole 9 yards, selling to restaurants. That was all working out fine until the fall of that year, which was the fall of 2008. And within a 2-week cycle, I went from restaurants being like, I'll buy, 400 jars of this for a Christmas party to like, I think it's going to be a Christmas lunch. Like, there's no capacity to spend. And so, I had to be 21 years old and realize that I was selling the world's most unnecessary luxury product, and this was not going to fare well. And the only thing you can do at that point is understand the reality of what's happening, understand that, planning won't save you, and start working on building other ideas. And during that period of time, I think I tried 5 or 6 other ideas. I mean, I usually don't talk about these, but like this is 2009. We were trying to sell fruit to offices. Like, this is before there were snacks in offices. And I remember going door to door being like, I'll ship you fruit every single week. We got a couple of people, but that didn't work. And we tried a bunch of things. And the recession got so bad, I ended up taking a job at a big retailer as the director of strategy, learning a bunch for a year. And then a year later being like, okay, e-commerce is blowing up. I should take another shot at entrepreneurship. But it was already scary then. I was already giving up $100,000 salary. I was already giving up the stability of going to work and a fast track to be a VP very early in my career. So the other thing that most founders just don't appreciate is you take an enormous amount of risk all the time. And even when you build a company this big that feels very successful, I mean, there's a lot of things that could pull that away from you. There's a lot of market conditions that could change that make things very difficult. And so you constantly feel like you are risking it all. And that's really one of the hallmarks of doing this.
Well, I think people listening, again, anyone that's starting a business, I feel that, by the way, all the time. And, you almost don't let yourself enjoy the success because you're like thinking about the next chess move almost, like what's the next thing that could go wrong.
Totally. That's a very real thing. Everyone's like, enjoy the journey. And you're like, I have to make sure there's no one chasing me behind me right now.
And there's a big hole in the road in front of us. Yeah.
Totally. And there's really some truth to only the paranoid survive. There is so many things that can go bad, that can be so catastrophic, many of which are completely out of your control. And so, getting some comfort around that and just the reality of that's what it's going to be is really important.
So that makes me want to talk a little bit about how you perceive like work-life balance. People are perhaps listening to that. It's like, well, you're always worrying about the future, which you have to, like you said, the paranoid survive. But how do you balance that with, people listening might think, well, that's too much. How do you balance it? What do you do?
I mean, I would describe this as a career that is too much. I really dislike people that lie to people. I am not ever going to tell you. This is a career where you have a very different series of controls. So for example, most people have jobs where they have no choice on who their colleagues are, because they are stuck in a company and they have to kind of go in and they have to go along to get along a little bit. So an entrepreneur, you have all the choice. You fire the people that you don't like, you keep the people that you do like, you recruit as hard as you can to bring incredible people to your organization. So you have that control, but you don't have control of what the market is going to do. You do not have control always of what your employees or how your business is completely going to perform. And ultimately, those things, whether you had an influence or not, are your responsibility. It's your responsibility as a founder to have the answers. It's your responsibility to build the strategy. It's your responsibility to pick up the pieces when all sorts of things blow up around you. And so that leaves you with very little control of your time. Because sometimes, so the first thing about balance is you have to be able to really roll with those punches. So I have lots of weekends where nothing blows up and I can have a great weekend and not think about things and, go on my merry way and have a great time. There's also weekends where it doesn't matter if I have a wedding. I have to work because it is my job to work, because I am the only person that can solve a problem. And so along my journey, I missed lots of weddings and lots of birthday parties and lots of incredible things that I would have loved to be in. I also got to see an extraordinary amount of things that most people never get to see in their lifetime. And I got to build the careers of a ton of people that gives you an enormous amount of pride. So I think, if your question is on balance, my parting advice is that you really look for I look for balance in a year versus balance in a day or in a month. There are professions where you can have a really balanced day, right? If you're a school teacher, you work for 8 hours, you have 8 hours of free time, and you sleep for 8 hours. I will never have that life as an entrepreneur. But I could have a life where, I look at a year and zoom out and say, look, I spent enough time with my family this year. I spent enough time on vacation this year. I spent enough time building. Because I think a long time ago, I realized that nothing great in business is often accomplished unless you are sprinting. You got to sprint. You got to sprint to close that partnership. You got to sprint to close that deal. You got to sprint to close the piece of fundraising. And during that period, you need to be very intensely focused because the market is not going to wait for you. It doesn't care that you want a long breakfast. It doesn't care. You need to perform at what it's asking for. So, you just zoom out. You remember that you don't sprint all year. You try and plan a year according, and you try and build something that's as sustainable as possible to give you the best lifestyle. And you remember that, you are, as founders, it often feels like we are unreplaceable. There are lots of great people that you can groom to take your role. And so thinking about that as well.
There's so many great insights there that I think if people are listening carefully can get inspired by, and also frankly accept that entrepreneurship is not the glamorous thing that we sometimes all think it is. I had a similar experience to what you just described about a wedding. I had two friends who got married separate weekends. One I cancelled both because I had a work commitment, and one never spoke to me again, and one is my lifelong friend. So there's also an element of like you end up hoping that people accept you, right, for who you are, and appreciating you for who you are, and perhaps building a circle around you that will accept that this is a lifestyle choice, right? So
it's part of who you are, right? Like, look, I'll be late, I'll have to cancel, but I'll also do incredible things last minute, right? Like, people are spheres at the end of the day, and you don't get to take a chunk out of them and put another chunk in. That's just part of reality.
Well, I know you started your business, ClearCo, with Andrew D'Souza, and I know you were together when you started the business, and then you broke up and changed roles. Tell us a little bit about that for people listening. How does that work? Do you think people should work together if they're in a relationship, or do you think, what's your learning from that? What's your hindsight looking back, a suggestion for people?
Yeah, I think you should choose the best damn co-founder you can find. And if that happens to be your partner, that happens to be your partner. If that happens to be someone you know really well. I mean, I've had co-founders my whole career. I deeply admire sole founders. I think that is really, really hard. Co-founders, no one will ever work as hard as your co-founder with you. I mean, you are in this boat together, figuring it out together. And my first two co-founders, I wasn't in a relationship with. We were friends from university. We split up a company, a third, because we had no other rational way to do it. We didn't have a shareholders agreement against every advice of every lawyer for the first 8 years of my career. Remember, we signed a shareholders agreement like 2 days before we sold to Groupon because it was part of the whatever piece of paperwork we needed to close. And so, our rationale is like, look, if we were going to screw over each other, we would have done it a long time ago. And so I think finding great people to work with is really hard. Co-founder relationships are really hard. They take a lot of work. They are just like relationships with, any other type of partner. They go through lots of different phases. They take a lot of work to get right. Like I had left Groupon. I had met Andrew. We were in a great relationship. He was an incredible founder. We shared an incredible passion for how entrepreneurs would funded. We came from very different perspectives. I mean, I had raised no venture capital before this business. He had raised a ton of venture capital before this business. And, we built something that was really successful actually based on how different we were, not based on how similar we were. We understood the value proposition for founders in a very different way. I mean, we joke all the time, like this company would be half the size if I ran it alone, and this company would have gone bankrupt 10 times if Andrew ran it alone. So and then look, we started this company 7 years ago. Relationships go through different phases, and Andrew and I had grown as, co-founders together and ultimately continue to run the business very successfully together. I mean, everyone wants to hear a story here. I mean, Andrew and I talk to each other 8 times a day, and we have, all these employees that we care about, and most importantly, all the founders that we back that care about. And so, I think it's a myth in society that, once you end a relationship, you can't create a different type of relationship with a person that can be really successful. And I think the media propagates that, and I don't think that's always true. And I think we've proven a lot of that.
Another great insight. I think that people do have a misconception, don't they, that if a relationship ends, that's it. You never talk to each other again, which is very sad to have a perception that's the way it should
Which is
be.
very, I mean, your romantic partner knows you the best. Like
Right.
it's such a ridiculous, and I totally get that sometimes there's emotion or sometimes people need a cool off period, but like for the most part, these are people that have really cared about each other. And if they change the relationship, they change the relationship.
But I think it's like a business arrangement, isn't it? Sometimes business arrangements, that you tried and it didn't work out. I think it's about being honest. You said this a bit earlier, and I think that's such an important moral code core. Being honest with each other, being open with each other, and then it's not a messy breakup, then, is it? Because you haven't done something behind someone's back, or it's just straightforward. This is the decision, and I think a lot of people could take a lot from that. So I know you rebranded the business as well. I wanted to talk about branding a bit because I really believe in branding, and I think people listening need to spend more time on branding. But originally you launched the business as ClearBank and then changed it to ClearCo. Why? And what do you think makes a good rebrand?
Look, when founders come up with names, we were in my Chicago apartment, and I still remember I was like, I really like Clear, and we're like, Clear free, and we were brainstorming, and then we came up with ClearBank. And the only negative we could see about ClearBank is we're like, well, what if it's a bank that's clear, which means it has no money inside? So we laughed about that for years. So you come up with something that I think resonates with you. I loved the name ClearBank. I think what happened is as we were expanding to be beyond capital, which is a big part of our expansion, there was the word bank was always associated with founders with capital. And so that's sort of part of our business, and part of the business that will continue to grow is continuing to find revenue-based funding to founders. But, we had built an incredible insights platform for our founders to see different things that they could track in their business. We had built a partnership platform where people could see, and founders could see, what are the partners they should connect with next. We built a platform called ClearX, where if you were interested in selling your business, we could introduce you to vetted buyers. Like there's so many buyers that were looking for, like, I want to buy an e-commerce company with, 5 million in revenue, growing at 20% year over year. And we can make those connections really effectively. I think we sold 13 of our portfolio companies, which is amazing. And so then it was, well, we need to have a name that means more than just capital. And so that was the rebrand from ClearBank to ClearCo. And I really like ClearCo. I mean, it's a shorter URL. We're clear.co now. And I think I like the alliteration. So look, a brand, the best thing I've ever heard of a brand is not what you say about yourself. Brand is what other people say about you. And so doing that listening exercise to really understand how your customers perceive you is the number one important thing.
Interesting. I recently trademarked Metaverse Bank, and I'm scared to use it because the word bank just generally is scary, isn't it? I think anything to do with bank just feels like you're getting into all sorts of potential legal ramifications. And another thing you did, I noticed, is you changed your job title. So when you started the business, you were president, and then you moved to CEO. Is there some insight there that people listening might find useful? Any reason for that?
I think the company was just so founders. Like, I think when you ask our team if things changed when Andrew and I changed titles or roles, I mean, we are still the same people we were, 6 months ago before we did this. We'll always be the same people, but sometimes different seasons need different operators. And so I am, very focused on execution. I have operated through a lot of really tough economic periods. I mean, I started my career in the recession. And so I think, we just kind of knew that we were heading for, I think, an environment where we needed a little bit more of that bias. Andrew's an incredible product visionary, will always be that. And he gets to do that job as exec chairman in a way that allows him to do that with being out of a lot of the day-to-day, the execution work. And so that's why we changed roles. And I think every company has to contemplate this. I think there's a lot of ego with title and roles, and that's really not what you should be thinking about. The framework I give my executives all the time is, look, half of your job, like if you're the head of marketing, half of your job is to make sure that marketing is successful. The other half of your job is to make sure that the company is successful. And most people never think about that. They think about 100% of their job is to make marketing successful. And I'm like, well, we're not on one team, right? It's like living in a in a beautiful house and your house is perfectly clean and your carpets are perfectly vacuumed and you walk outside and there's gun violence. Like it doesn't really matter how clean your house is if your neighborhood is poor. It doesn't matter how well your function is doing if the company is not doing well. And so it forces people to work together in a different way. And I really do like believe the line of like what we could all accomplish without ego is absolutely mind blowing. As soon as people start thinking about who gets credit and what happens, it really, really changes the dynamic of playing as a team.
Yeah, sometimes that you replace the word ego with being proud of what you've done and proud of what you've achieved, and it'd be a much more powerful way of thinking about it. Do you I mean, you mentioned earlier about how you took a job. And so again, a lot of people listening might relate to that a lot. You know, you took a job, you mentioned that it was safe, you had that salary, there was that moment, and you've had that, you know, that perceived failure. So you've had that, you've got that battle scar, and you're like, okay, I don't want to feel that pain again. And so here you are with this job. But you know, did you know you were always an entrepreneur? How did you break free almost from that moment? Because it must have been quite easy for you, and I'm sure it is how many times in your career, just to take a great job and play that game instead.
You know, I can remember how I felt during that period of time. Like it just felt like the world was falling apart. I was so grateful to have a job that was paying me well. I used it as my opportunity to learn. I was like, great, I work for a retailer. I'm going to learn absolutely everything about retail and buying and e-commerce and sourcing things from China. That was like, I perceived it as that. And then I never lost that, like, okay, I really want to start something. And, you know, I remember we started Buytopia in the evenings. I mean, we started it, I remember in October, and I would go to work from 8 in the morning to kind of 8 o'clock at night. And then from 8 o'clock until midnight, you know, the guys would come over to my place and we would spend all of that time building this company. And we had like flip chart paper on the whole house. My roommate wanted to kill me. Like I was fully trying to start a company. And this went on, you know, from October, I think, until February. And in February, my business partner looked at me and he goes, you have to quit. You have to quit your job. And I was like, no, I don't have to quit. I can keep doing this like moonlighting thing at night. And he's like, no, you have to take the plunge and you have to quit. And I remember how terse that moment was. I remember how I was super scared. And I would still stand by it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. One of the great myths we tell people in their career is that they cannot go back. I've had hundreds of people work for me through my career, and all of the talented ones, if they sent me a text message that said, I want to come back, or I want to work for you again, or do you have a role, in a heartbeat, I would hire most of them back. Like literally, it would take like 4 days to hire most of them back. And so this is something that's perpetuated by big employers, right? There's 2 giant career myths that are perpetuated by big employers. The first is that you have to need a certain amount of experience to be good at something. And I think that's generally pretty bullshit. I don't think you need to be able to learn at your own speed. So if it's taking you a long time to learn, yeah, you need 2 years. I mean, if you can learn something in 6 months, you can learn something in 6 months. So that's one thing that I think does a terrible job. And I mean that the system does that. It's like, well, you can only go from analyst to associate after 2 years of experience. You can only go from this to that. It's like, no, that's just a system of retention to keep you employed. And the second is that you shouldn't take a risk because you can't go back to something. And even in very big executive roles, I mean, people can be incredibly creative. If you try something and it doesn't work out, and most of the time you try something and it does work out, and you are on a new adventure and you're enjoying that. But I think that's one of the things that holds most people back is that they think that they can't go back to a place, and I would argue that's not the case. And so I remember when I quit my job, I had a BlackBerry at the time, and BlackBerry had a little notepad on it. And in my notepad, I remember writing the names of like, you know, the 15 people I can call if I really needed a job. And on my darkest days, I was like, okay, I can call one of these people and be like, I need a job. And who knows if any of them would have offered me a role, but I remember having that as kind of my safety blanket.
Do you know, it's I got like a tingly feeling when you're talking about this because you know, it's so refreshing to meet someone so successful that basically is saying you could quit your job with me or others, and if you do it right, you do it the right way, you treat people right, then you can come back. And I think that what most people are doing is almost like trapping people into fear. right? It's almost like, well, if you quit this job, you might never get a job like this again. Well, that's what traps people. And I just really feel like, I don't know, it's really, really nice to hear someone who hires a lot of people, has a lot of people working for them, saying, look, you work hard, you do the right thing. When your moment comes, I'll be there for you. And if you leave and it doesn't work, you can text and come back. And that basically it means that people who have a job, who are so scared to lose it, it kind of gives them a chance to be free and experience being an entrepreneur. In fact, I bet when you bring them back, you're kind of happy they've had that experience. They know what it's like for you, right? It's not all wonderful at the top.
Exactly. When people have gone out and tried something for themselves and failed, my God, they are the best employees ever, because they're like, look, I get how hard this was. I get the security you're offering me. I get what I can build here. Like, those are incredible, incredible people. And I really do believe that. And you're 100% right. You have to leave in the right way. If you leave and you're an ass about it and you give people 2 weeks of notice and you have a really senior role, no one is going to help you out because you fundamentally didn't help them out. But, if you give people lots of notice and time and find yourself a replacement, like, my God, you have no idea how the arc of many people's careers is way longer than they think. You end up meeting people you met 10 years, 15 years ago that you had, little interactions that come back in your life. And people have a very limited capacity to remember facts and a very enormous capacity to remember how you made them feel. And so when you can make people feel really good and really secure and genuinely add value, like, you have a lot of options in front of you.
So in TikTok today, I am there's a top 10 ranking of TikTokers, and I'm number 1 in the ranking today.
Wow!
I'm proud of. Not ego.
Can you do TikTok?
Yes, we can do a TikTok. Yes, we can. The second person in the list. I didn't mention this just to flex. I mentioned this because I want to highlight your point. The second person in the list does videos and content around quitting in spectacular ways, and I couldn't be more opposite to them, right? Because I think burning bridges is such a mistake. I know it's the dream, isn't it? Maybe to go in and tell your boss, "I'm quitting. Stuff your job. I'm off to start my own business." But the reality is, and I comment on their videos a lot, the reality is that the best thing you could ever do is go into your boss and say, "I want to start my own business. Would you like to be my investor? Would you like to back me?" If they know what you're like, and they're probably the closest person to you after your family, they're often the best investors, right? And I think people miss that. They miss that trick, I think.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, it's not even a trick. It's very real. I mean, we have a real ClearCo mafia of ex-employees that have started companies. I think we've had more than a dozen companies come out of people that have worked here, and really successful ones. Andrew and I try and invest in as many of them as we can, because when you go work for someone, you know them really well. Like, you can actually mentor them in a very different way. And there's a different set of tools you have from being an employee to being a founder. And we can pass on a lot of that in a really healthy way.
Now, you mentioned earlier SoftBank invested in you guys, and you've had some incredible investors. I think every great investment company has invested in you guys. I think, what's it like when you know the value of equity and you run this model where you don't take equity, you help people with capital? Is it strange to then raise money via an equity model? Did you try to tempt them into a cash flow model instead?
If I could have raised ClearCo for ClearCo, I would have done that all day long. I mean, we're building.
There's a gap in the market.
There's a gap because it didn't exist, right? I didn't have the opportunity to use revenue-based funding to do what we're doing, and so we had to use the conventional debt and equity route, which I think is fine. But I mean, and look, I love our investors, and we've had some really supportive folks, but I don't want to fool people in how expensive equity is when it works. I mean, we have paid our seed investors 378 times their money.
Amazing.
It's very expensive when it works. It's very, very expensive when it works. And it's not like I can buy them out. They keep riding up with us. And that money was very valuable in the early days. And of course, capital is super valuable in the early days. You need capital to grow. There's only so much you can do bootstrapping. But whether or not that person gets a cap on their return, I think is probably a reasonable way to think about it, which is how we thought about the ClearCo model.
I kind of see a new Dragon's Den where it is about backing people and not taking equity off them. There's probably a market there for that.
We've
It feels
proven
to
it
me
out.
that's the way it's
We've
going.
got 7,000 founders. I mean, think of another VC firm that
Incredible.
has anywhere more than 300 founders, right?
The other thing I noticed is you've invested in 8 times more women than a traditional VC firm, right? So I feel like you're also doing what everyone else is talking about. Like everyone talks about being founder friendly, and everyone talks about wanting to build a diverse portfolio, but you're actually doing it. Is that a conscious decision, or is that just happening?
I mean, isn't it funny when lip service is different than reality? Um, yeah, I mean, look, people have been talking about investing in more women for 30 years. And, women get 2% of venture dollars that went up to 2.8%, that after COVID went down to 2%. So, I mean, if you were running any business and you had made zero progress in 30 years on a metric, I think you should relook at your model. I think that's the reality of, people say they want to be helpful and they say they want to do the right thing and they say women great entrepreneurs and then they, back, one of them every 5 years. So look, our model was just very different. We decided to do this completely data driven. I had always known there was incredible women and minorities and folks without post-secondary education that build incredible companies. We just needed to find them. And the interesting part, Simon, about our model is we were building something that was fast. So you plug in the accounts that run your business and we can give you a term sheet in 20 minutes because a founder has a lot of things. They do not have a lot of excess time. And in doing that, we took the bias out of all of this decision making because we weren't meeting you. We weren't hearing your pitch deck. We weren't hearing who you went to school or who you knew or how you got an email introduction to us. And none of those things are inherently bad, but they have created a lot of biases in our systems. And so the numbers are even actually higher than you said. We've backed 25 times more women than the venture capital industry average. More than half of our portfolio is female founders. A third of our founders are BIPOC. And a quarter of our founders, this one I love, didn't go to university. And these are just these biases that we've held for so long. And we've always known, I mean, you need to be a great hustler and a great entrepreneur to create a good business. And if you have great metrics, you should be able to get your business funded. And the world has gotten very distracted. And I just think about how incredible it's going to be when we live in a world where every business that deserves capital gets access to the capital. Because entrepreneurs ultimately build the world that we want to live in. They solve the problems that we care deepest about. And I think it's a pretty good future.
I think entrepreneurs will solve the problems we face. I don't have much faith in governments will. I hope they do too, but I think entrepreneurs in government might. But we think outside the box. Back to your point, we don't necessarily we're not entrenched in the problem. We can fix the problem. And I think you just touched on something there that not many people touch on, and I want to go at it quickly for a second, and that is funding people who didn't go to university. Because it does feel like, university is almost like you must go to university. You must spend 4 years of your life learning marketing in university instead of 3 months learning it for real at the coalface, which is ridiculous, I think. But how do we change that narrative? I mean, you're doing it through funding, but I still feel like it's out there as a myth that people should go to university, right?
I think you fundamentally change the narrative by building those success stories. I mean, people are like, why haven't people funded more women? I'm like, because women haven't built more billion-dollar companies. As soon as there's, hundreds of women that build unicorns and all those investors missed out, they're going to really look at how they missed all these. So it's the same thing. You got to create the success stories. And there's plenty of success stories of folks that didn't go to university that can be telling that story more. But again, it's a lot of these myths in society that, the only way to be happy is to have a, conventional university degree and a conventional marriage and a conventional job and all the conventions. And it's ultimately always the risk takers and people that are willing to think outside the box that are really good. And your success should be determined on how creative and clever you are and how hard you work. And I think we just have to keep building that. And I think funding is a critical part of it because, when you're, as I think a dragon, you get to have a lot of people be like, look, can you teach people how to build businesses? And you can do a lot of teaching, but fundamentally, if you don't solve the funding gap, businesses can only get so far.
you did a beautiful tweet recently about your father, and
thank you.
it actually made me feel quite emotional. And one of the things I took from it was you talk about in that tweet, and by the way, everyone should follow you on social media if they want to be inspired. We'll put your links down below. I thought what you talked about, like he taught you about cash flow before he taught you to ride a bike. But by the way, I've got a 5-year-old who I have not yet taught to ride a bike. So, but I've taught him how to decide.
The cash flow lesson is coming.
Yeah, so I related to it because I've taught my son, he watches Dragon's Den all the time with me, which company to invest in and which company not to invest in when we watch Dragon's Den. But he can't ride a bike yet. So I related to it. But I mean, do you think entrepreneurs are born or bred, and how do you think your upbringing has influenced you?
You know, my parents weren't entrepreneurs, so I think that was really interesting. They encouraged me to take risk really early in my career. They didn't give me any money, which, you know, I was never happy with. But they, you know, told me I wouldn't starve. So I knew that kind of if I really ran out of everything, that they would send me money so I could buy food. I think my parents did a couple things really well. Encouraging your kids to take risk really early in your career, I think, is very important. It is very difficult to develop a risk-taking muscle when you do it much later. I think giving, especially girls, the confidence around math and science is like mission critical. I understand numbers really well. I took engineering. I've never had that scare me. And I always say business math isn't hard math. Engineering is way harder. Like business math is kind of like ratios with more zeros. That's really it. But that fluidity and that confidence, I don't know how we got into a place where that was somehow lacking, you know, was really important. And then I think then just the true, like, knowing that you can fail and that you'll kind of still be loved by your family. I mean, this is a career where there's a lot of people trying to pull you down. There's a lot of things that don't work, and knowing that you kind of have like true unconditional love is pretty important.
Did you surround yourself by people that think this way, or did you filter that over time, or it can't have always been surrounded by people that accept failure? There must have been judgment.
Well, there's a lot of judgment. There's a lot of people that like laugh and they like roll your eyes, and that part gets easier as you get older because you've done so many things that have been unconventional. You either just have filtered those people out of your life, or you don't actually listen to them very much when they laugh. I do think I would say that like surrounding yourself with a circle of people that take risks, that believe in you, is really, really important. Look, I think one of my favorite lines is like, we're the average of the 5 people we're closest to. I mean, just like think about that for a second. You're the average of the 5 people you are closest to. So you better choose your 5 pretty carefully, because you are going to adopt a lot of their mentality and their personality traits. And so it makes a huge difference in your outlook and your positivity. Like entrepreneurs by default have to be optimists. They are literally trying to break the system every single day. So if you don't have people that believe that you can do that, and I mean, you also can't be delusional as you do that. You can't believe that everything is possible day one. So you got to kind of figure out the path to do that. But I do think choosing people that give you a lot of joy and that give you a lot of love and that give you a lot of confidence, but make sure that you're looking in reality, are really, really important. And so I haven't actually thought about that for a long time, but, you know, and I think COVID probably did a really good job of most of that. A lot of the superficial friendships dropped off pretty quickly, or the people that we just kind of saw each other at events or whatever that happened to be. And people genuinely gravitated to people they like working with and they like talking to.
For people listening, nearly all of our listeners are on Spotify. And for those listening, talking about having a BlackBerry, and you sound like you're a very wise old soul, but you are young. You mentioned earlier you're the youngest Dragon's Den at the time. You're the youngest dragon on Dragon's Den, and I think I want people to go on YouTube and just come and say hello to you, because you sound like someone that's in your late 70s, and you've got so much knowledge. Why are you so successful so young?
Well, it's not the years, it's the miles.
It's not the years, it's the miles. I'm trying to digest that.
It's not the amount of
that's a good one.
You have, it's the amount of running you did. And so when you are a founder, and when in a single year you try and build 10 different businesses and only 2 of them work, you get a lot of experience there. And I think that's ultimately what wisdom doesn't come from reading it in a book. Wisdom comes from like the genuine life experience you are having and things really not working out and you taking the time to reflect and build yourself into a better person as a result of that. And people can use their experiences to do all sorts of things. I mean, you can have really rough experiences and experience a lot of, depression and negative thoughts. You can use that to rebuild. I mean, one of the most fascinating, I think, studies is on like your own perception of stress. Like when you look at stress, you can say like, look, this is really stressing me out and this is having a toll on my body and this is making me worse. Or you can truly be like, this is what's going to make me better. Like, this is what is going to refine me as an individual. This is what's going to make me invincible, is the fact that I have lived through all of that. And it's like perception that matters more than reality. I mean, there is terrible things that happen to you as a founder. And it's really, really painful to watch when your business goes through cycles where it isn't doing well and when market conditions change and when people quit and when all sorts of bad things happen. But if your perception of that is this is going to make me stronger, it's very, very different than anything else.
But I wonder, like, did you start thinking about business at 8 years old, or when your father was teaching you about cash flow? It just feels like you've been learning. You've kind of been learning business from a very young age to have all this knowledge and, frankly, all this success at your age. Do you think it's just from kind of a very young age being exposed? But about Tiger Woods is taught golf at 3.
Yeah.
Do you think it's partly that?
Yeah, I think my parents did so I was a very curious kid. I was asking questions about everything all the time. I remember one of the problems I couldn't figure out at the age of 8 or something was I couldn't figure out how you could like build a hotel, because I couldn't figure out how, if you only charge like $100 a night, how you could get like enough money to build a building. And my dad tried to like teach me this like concept of debt, that you could like do it in, that you could start something and then pay it off over time. And I still remember just being so confused about how a hotel was built. Like I remember thinking about this problem and I don't know why. But you have to look. I think my parents did a great job, like inspiring, because they would tell me all sorts of interesting stories about business. And they, I remember I was in grade 7, and my dad's like, "Okay, you're old enough to read The Economist now," and he would like put this magazine down, and I was like trying to figure out what was happening with world events. So I think that was like, and business stories are great. I mean, most of them are better than fiction. Some of the things that happens at work are like better than the best movie or sitcom I could have ever watched, because they're just like, they're so unbelievable sometimes. And sometimes I actually can't even watch TV because I'm like, this is too close to my real life. Like all these things going wrong and blowing up. I'm like, I have a real version of this. I don't need to watch it on TV, right? But fostering, like, I think if you're a parent, fostering that curiosity in kids, I think business is such a natural thing to understand, right? We complicate it enormously, but I mean, are you selling a product for $10 that costs you $5? Like every day, are you doing that? And being enormously creative with how to do those things. So I think those are really important things to foster. And we had lots of conversations about that. And there was definitely a part of me that feels like I was, that curiosity was always fostered. The other thing that's really made me interesting that my parents did is like, I was one of 4 kids. I was the first girl. There was 3 girls, and then the boy was the youngest. And so I think I was like really raised, and I was raised with no concept of like girl jobs versus boy jobs. And so I came from, Calgary in Canada, which is like, way closer to kind of farming communities. So like, I don't know, I learned how to mow the lawn really well, and I learned how to change tires. And I just like never thought of things as being like masculine versus feminine. And that's a really important trait as an entrepreneur, because you have to be willing to roll up your sleeves and get your hands dirty all the time and learn new things, and really not have an ego about doing them.
I have so many questions I haven't asked you because I've just been enjoying listening to your stories and insights. But there's a few things I want to make sure I get off you before we have to let you go and run your incredible company. I think first of all, I wanted to ask a slightly controversial question. Your investments on Dragon's Den. Do you have a favorite? Are you allowed to say which one you love the most? Would you get?
I have many
that upset some of the others.
But no, I have a couple that have been, incredible. I invested in the Airbnb for RVs called RV Easy, and that's done an extraordinary job. It was 2 ex-military veterans that started the company, some of the hardest working guys I've ever met. Had a great D2C bed-in-a-box company called Endy that did exceptionally well. That was from the show. And then did another direct-to-consumer brand that was all about connecting local farmers with people that wanted to buy locally produced meats, and they would sell a $300 box of meat that would get delivered to your house once a month called True Local, and we had a really good outcome on those. So I certainly have. And then this, the last couple of seasons, there's been some new ones that have been exciting. So we'll see how all of those play out.
And on the ClearCo side, tell us about some of the companies you funded.
Oh my gosh, I don't have time to give you all the stories. I can give you one that's really amazing. Moroccan founder living in the Netherlands. He sees the rise of the sneaker marketplaces in the US and is like, I'm going to build one of these in Europe. 3 years ago, he does a couple $1 million in sales. 2 years ago, 20 to 30 million. And last year, over 100 million, grown exclusively on ClearCo capital. And so you can build an extraordinary business. I mean, he has, 4 kids. Like, he's like, this has changed my whole life. I built this incredible company for me and my family. And it's pretty cool to see success stories like that.
Again, a bit like you were saying earlier about building a hotel, I think I've kind of figured that one out a few years ago. But I don't know how you find is it 3.7 billion you said you've invested so far? Was it 3.7 billion? Did I hear that right?
3.7 billion. How do we find money?
Where does it come from? Where is this money?
That's a good question. So, I mean, originally it came from founders because they understood our value proposition. It came from folks like Jason Finger, who had started Seamless, and he was like, man, I would have totally funded my food delivery business completely different if I had revenue-based funding. So he gave us, one of our early credit facilities. And then from there, we've been able to get, more structured credit providers. And so we have banks that now provide us a lot of our capital to do this.
One of the things I just want to quickly jump back to, you mentioned earlier, it's not the years, it's the miles. I like the fact you're one of the few founders I've interviewed. I've interviewed hundreds of founders at this point in my career, and who mentions don't worry about reading a book. I mean, reading books is good, but that whole read these 5 books to be successful. What you said, which I think is really true, and I won't want people to miss it, is the experience of doing it is probably much better than reading about it, right? So just go out there and make it happen. I really think that's refreshing.
Yeah, and I mean,
you're not selling a book right now, I guess, but most people are selling a book. You should read my book.
I have gotten lots of great insights from books. I also think there's lots of controversial advice in books where you can read both of it. I mean, 0 to 1's a great book, and it talks about building a monopoly. But Peter made a lot of his money on backing what was the 8th competitor in social media, and so there's pieces in all of these books that I think are valuable. I mean, books are like a great thing to read on a plane or to listen to an audiobook on a plane, and you'll get a couple ideas. But ultimately, you cannot replace the miles, and you cannot replace you doing your own learning. And learning is not just experience. It's not just things happening to you. It's actually the time to really sit back and to be like, what did I miss? And people miss this, and one of the reasons it's so hard to do this exercise is because we're so distracted. When you do the exercise of what did I miss and how did I fuck this up, you have to sit there without your cell phone with a pencil and a piece of paper, and you have to be like, what were the 6 things I should have noticed or that were distracting me where I didn't see this coming? And it's not meant to be negative. It's actually meant to complete your learning cycle. And it's only after that you can actually mentally move on from something. What did I learn here? So anyway, I think that's really, really valuable.
Yeah, and again, this point you're making here, I want to highlight something for people listening and how I interpret what you're saying, which I think is so important for people to perhaps see the nuance on, is that you, when you experience things for yourself, you can relate them back to your own personality, your own moral code. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, you just mentioned 0 to 1, Peter Thiel's book, okay? Yeah. And he, in that book, talks about how China is copying. Yeah. And when I read that book, I've spent 20 years in Asia. He doesn't know Asia. China isn't copying. It is innovating. It is learning. Facebook copied MySpace. MySpace copied Friendster. Everybody's copying everyone. He labeled China a copycat.
Copy and innovate. Yeah.
He wrote that book. People reading that book will have a perception based on his interpretation that China is copying, right? And he's wrong because he only spent 5 minutes there. So sometimes those books can lead you down the wrong path and give you the wrong insight because it's not relating to your own personal experience. So anyway, it's such an important point to highlight, and I've never heard anyone talk about it before. So I just wanted to throw it out. Look, I just wanted to ask you one final question to end the podcast. I feel like as entrepreneurs, sometimes it can all get glamorized. We can talk about all these things that we've achieved and experienced and done. But do you have any regrets?
It's a really good question. I have many regrets. I call the regret game the shoulda, coulda, woulda, right? I mean, I remember in the school library, we found a domain that's in the top 10 domains today that was $5.99 at the time. I mean, I'm sure it was a multi-million-dollar domain that we didn't buy. I remember not buying pre-IPO Facebook stock, and you can play all of those. I don't think that's that game only ends in one thing, which is depression. I think you have to look at for yourself. Are you spending? You will find what you're looking for. So, if you look for biases in this world, all you see is biases in this world. I try and spend all of my time thinking about opportunity. That's it. How is there something better to build here? What is the positive part that we're building? How do we back the people that are building those things? And if you spend your time looking for opportunities, and I am so, as the childlike wonder in me, I mean, if you were to sat next to me on the train and tell me you ran a giant garbage company, I would be so interested in the business of garbage. I'm like, how does this happen? What do we do? How do we fix recycling? How do we you're just, that would be part of my DNA because I would just be really curious about it. And that curiosity will always lead you to a place where you can examine some of the things. And then the second thing is remembering that the reasons we do things in society does not have to be rational or logical. It is often mostly historical. For whatever reason, in space and time, we had a series of technologies and we developed a system the way it was. And we haven't looked at it for a long time. And that gives you the opportunity to innovate on so many businesses and industries and sectors. And so certainly I have regrets. I have, I wish in many points in my career I had enjoyed the journey a little bit more. I think, there was lots of poor decisions we made that I would totally do differently. But I just try and spend my time thinking about, you can look at that and you should learn. But after that learning point, you should just look for the next opportunity. And that will give you, I think, a lot of joy and excitement to solve that next series of problems.
I think the perception of a problem or perception of a regret, but you said at the beginning of the podcast about that, I think people need to perhaps look at things. I mean, sometimes bad luck could be good luck, that type of idea, right? It just takes time sometimes to see that. Honestly, Michele, I've loved talking to you. I could just keep talking to you, but I know you've got to go and do your wonderful business, which is helping so many founders. I know quite a lot of founders you've helped, and it's really making a big difference. And a founder helping founders is, the holy grail as far as I'm concerned. So thank you for taking time out to come and share your knowledge here and for doing what you're doing. It's been an absolute honor.
Oh, thank you. I mean, look, I believe in that too. We're by founders for founders, and it's a really special group of people, and thank you for everything you do to amplify the stories of founders. These are not easy, and the more that people feel like they're not alone, the more that people feel like they can do it.
Yeah, people listening, you're definitely not alone. Thank you so much, Michele.
Thank you.
I hope you found today's podcast both inspiring and useful. And if you need more help, visit purposefulproject.com, where all the resources to help you start and grow a business are free.